Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest episode in the series of commentaries on Anatomy of a Crisis. Life goes on. It's great to see you all on this beautiful, sunny November day. I'm saying that because it's not, but it would be nice if it were. So welcome everybody, and thanks for taking time out of your day. In this series, we interview HR leaders and thinkers who not only have obviously been working through the last 6 months with their clients and their thinking, and to get them to contribute with us to our thoughts on how best to navigate both originally through the crisis and now as we approach possibly the end, starting to plan and think about what we should be thinking as HR leaders and HR thinkers in the new world which is starting to take shape. So I'm Tom Holmes, Founding Director of Brand Performance, and we've really enjoyed talking to all sorts of organisations on this webinar over the last 30 weeks. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Kerry Nutley, who is from Oracle Corporation and is a thought leader in HR. So welcome, Kerry. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Tom. Lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today.
Could you give us a little indication as to what your role is within Oracle and why I'm calling you a thought leader?
Well, I hope I now live up to that very illustrious title. So my name is Kerry Nutley. I cover the UK and Ireland as Oracle's HCM, so Human Capital Management Strategy Director. So in a nutshell, what that means is I look at current trends within HR, understand the business impact, and then obviously how the technology through our CRM platforms within HR can really assist our customers to deal with those issues and obviously progress in an innovative way. So yeah, fantastic job, brilliant, and absolutely love it.
So one of the things which nearly all of our HR participants and actually potential participants as well have been talking about through the crisis is the need for better tools, better capability, better thinking about workforce planning and how to ensure that, you know, in the simplest terms, that they get their team in the right place with the right skills at the right time. Now, I guess I'm aware that you have been writing a paper in this area and actually thinking about it too. But I was wondering if we could start by your observations and your conversations about why workforce planning has become so important and why you and others are seeing it as kind of a critical dimension of HR being increasingly relevant post-COVID.
Well, I think, you know, Tom, we all know in the HR function that COVID was a people crisis. We also know that you know, it generated absenteeism, you know, worst case scenario, potentially death in service. And it was a pandemic that we all had to deal with. And where HR, I would say, as a function, being an ex-HR VP myself, we maybe was there to support the business, but as a function, it pushed us to the board table, to the number one agenda item with how we were going to manage the business. And when I say manage the business, what I truly mean is around business continuity. Now, you know, all great HR departments would have some risk management and some business continuity plans in place. You know, how many organizations had a pandemic, you know, disease process in place in terms of workforce management, training, those types of things, policies? I would say very, very few. We probably had in place as HR departments, maybe strike, you know, fire, building closure, those types of things. But actually what we found is that great HR departments, you know, used those and manipulated those to deal with the COVID situation. And I think what we're seeing here is a difference between, you know, a strike action, which may not have a definitive end date, or, you know, a building closure, which probably does. With COVID, what we're seeing is the situation is that continual changes, either through government policy or, you know, changes in infection rate, but an unclear answer to when this may or may not subside. So there's lots of unknowns, and none of them are in our control as an HR function.
It's
And
it's
so
very it's very interesting that you're picking up on that, Kerry. I mean, one of the areas and one of the areas we focus on in the business is financial services, and those organisations did have major disaster recovery plans for example, if there were an attack on the UK actually, or something like that. So they then had plans, but a lot of those plans were to fire up and move activities to other countries. And of course, a global pandemic
global,
has challenged that. So there was no point having a setup in
yeah.
Singapore to move to, because actually Singapore was closed down before. So it was kind of incredibly unexpected, the nature of it. And I wonder whether people aren't thinking that this is likely to continue. Yeah.
I think you're right, Tom. I mean, I'm not saying that HR didn't have those business continuity plans in place. They did. But what we didn't have is on this scale to this particular scenario, or unlikely that people did. And I think what we're saying is that, the amount of change is unknown, the timescales is unknown. And what that is therefore doing is taking business continuity into day-to-day management of HR, and predominantly within an HR workforce management. And what it's also doing is it's shortening the timescales. So normally when we have in-life plans, we're kind of looking at movers and levers, etc. But actually what we're doing here is we have a kind of unknown, either in terms of government policy, in terms of safe working distance, or kind of like an unknown fluctuation of absenteeism, either created through contact of the disease, management and self-isolation, or other things associated with it. And I think this is why workforce management is becoming part of day-to-day business continuity management. And
Yes.
it's changing it from being a function in traditional sense, where we have large organization HR functions within organizations, to a day-to-day responsiveness. And that's where I think it's predominantly changing.
Yes, and I guess a good example is high street retail. We are now 6 weeks away from Christmas. Over 25% of the normal trading of many of our high street retailers are done in this period. And as of today, I don't think that they are aware as to whether they are going to be open at all, for how long they're going to be open, and if they are open, under what restrictions. So this is an extraordinarily short time span for workforce planning, or even scheduling. I mean, we're moving from a kind of workforce planning, which is out there, to scheduling, the dynamism of what, and who's to say that on Wednesday there isn't a change in plan and an announcement of certain openings, etc., which then will create both a longer term workforce planning, but shorter term scheduling and other issues. It's extraordinary how quickly businesses are having to react at scale with their workforce.
You're precisely right, Tom. So we all know in workforce management that we would have had a calendarization of shrinkage or growth based on seasonality, which 9 times out of 10, I used to work in a large telecommunications company, weather could play an impact on that. But you normally knew seasonality wise when these things would happen. But I remember we were talking when we prepped for this call. On that morning, I'd woken up and turned on the BBC, and they were promoting the new John Lewis advert. And the managing director there was saying that the current pandemic has brought, the strategy of retail forward by 5 years. So it's not just about the workforce that we would come to expect to see in, face-to-face retail environment. The way in retail we're buying, we're purchasing through a remote online digital perspective is also changing. So it's not just about the government policy in terms of opening standard stores, but it's also about how we're responding and how we're managing as consumers, whether that's B2B or B2C, in terms of still being able to deliver, but maybe using different channels to market. So we've got the complexity of responding to the government policy, plus we've got this extra complexity of changing our model to be kind of more digital. And it's not that digital plans for workforce management wasn't always on the agenda. We know from the World Economic Forum that this was normally number one priority for many businesses to increase digitalization. What we're seeing though currently is that as being fast forwarded in kind of exponential times that people had never expected to do. And so what we're seeing in terms of workforce management is not just when I go back to business as usual, but actually what's the change in my marketplace, my consumer or business purchasing ways to market, and how therefore do I manage that?
And both a kind of trend in the speed and the need to react to real world events or political events is faster than we've ever seen before, but also an acceleration of trends which we kind of knew about and were kind of important, but weren't really front and center. I think that's fascinating that John Lewis are talking about 5 years advance in 5 months. And I know that large parts of the health service are talking about completely changing the way they operate, something which they believe, for example, I've talked about it before, but GPs going online, which was a kind of 25-year project and actually happened and is complete now for nearly all of our first frontline caregivers of that kind of nature. So I completely get it. And I think that second part, that acceleration of trends, is really fascinating because, to some extent, I think some of us were a bit ostrich-like, kind of going, yes, I know that's an important agenda, but I've got more important day-to-day things. But now, presumably, and certainly from my commentators, they're saying that they're no longer able to put off the acceleration of these things, and they have to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're so right. I remember precisely this time last year, because we also work with City HR, who supports the financial institutes in London from an HR function perspective.
Yeah.
And they have their conference every time this time of year. And I remember that there was a presentation from a innovative company that was showing coaching, but instead of having a one-to-one meeting, it was being done online. So you could go in and select your coach, and then you would have a one-to-one Zoom meeting. And they presented this, it was only 12 months ago. And they was asking for feedback as a part of a new market kind of test with some HR directors, and we're all going, oh no, might be all right for the millennials, but for most people want to have a face-to-face coach. It's about the relationship. And now I think about those thought processes that we had, and it's a kind of around what we know in terms of change management anyway, and our change curve. And for, I'd say 60% of the room, it was still wanted the old way of coaching. But now what we're seeing is, because we've been forced to kind of work in this digital way, that, what we're doing today, having this Zoom conference, people are much more comfortable through necessity with these digital approaches. I must admit, we can't have a broad brush sweeping statement that that's true for everybody, because sometimes people still feel, a video, I see you've got your home background there. For some people, that might be really uncomfortable, offering people to come into their homes from a work perspective. Likewise, we know with people with neurodiversity, we just have to be mindful that they might respond to digital technology in different ways. But we do know that, where we'd always talk about remote working and flexibility of remote working, actual take up of that for many hadn't obviously probably been as much as what we're going to see as the increase of that post-COVID, because actually what it's done is kind of, in essence, forced a change of what we were forecasting. And now once people have done it, accepted the change, I think we're going to start seeing that flexibility.
Yes.
It's really important.
So before we start moving on to what we need to do to respond to this, I guess as a third question, we've talked about the increased speed and then acceleration of trends which COVID has caused. But I suppose we should quickly revisit the question about, is it all going to go back to normal and normal slowness post COVID? Are we going to return to the previous world, or is this speed of reactivity and this acceleration of trends something which we should be planning for in the longer term? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Kerry.
Well, I think if I take my workforce management lens and I think about HR, because my job is to not only think about our products, but it's also to think about our customers, and I work a lot with them. I mean, we just completed what we call our AI at Work survey. It's a survey that we do globally that looks at the impact of AI. And we roll that out kind of around March time. And given COVID, we changed the questions to focus on well-being. So this was over 12,000 people globally. And, you know, we were surprised as Oracle to see that out of those 12,000 plus people that responded to it, 74% of all HR respondents found that they were more stressed this year compared to C-suite members, because COVID has been a people impacting scenario, and they have had to adapt, as we've just talked about, very quickly in terms of the commerciality, in terms of the change in marketplace, and supporting organizations and their people through it. So what we see is that there's obviously been negative connotations from dealing with the pandemic, but there's also been positive. We've talked about flexibility of home working. We've talked about agility. We've talked about resilience. We also should talk about the awareness of mental health and well-being, which has been lifted up to a priority, because, you know, it has had connotations on that as well, which we need to be mindful of. But in terms of workforce management, I think this agility part, from moving it from a midpoint, and I know being an HRPP, we were asked, you know, once a quarter to fill in a slide back deck that says, what's your strategic workforce plan? And we'd look at our kind of 18-month plan and say, well, it's probably more of the same of this. You know, potentially if there was any location issues or skills gaps issues, we might flag that. But I think what we're seeing now is that we've seen an acceleration of both skills and capability to look across the capability model in HR. So that's really understanding skills, data, people management, cost, resourcing, and tying that together to be agile. And I think, you know, what we've also seen from HR is that we can't, where you're a kind of plus 55 organization, is do this on a spreadsheet. So we are seeing people looking for, and our customers looking for, this connected data set from which we're seeing data, AI and machine learning drive some of the automation that maybe saw a bit of a vision 5 years out, and bringing that into the reality today to actually do what we call these kind of super jobs, which are applying our kind of human capabilities of strategy, foresight, creativity into the data reports to think what is truly going on.
Right, there's a number of points there which I'd like to kind of unpack, and I think are really interesting. So you're describing, Kerry, a situation where HR teams are overwhelmed by the need to complete the work they always used to do, and then this whole new pile of work which is coming. But by the sound of that, you're connecting that up to one of the trends which was pre-COVID, which is perhaps accelerating, which is the use of automated tools, AI, etc., to do the basic tasks, so that our HR teams can then focus on the more complicated planning and workforce planning tasks. Because in essence, what you're actually, yes, what I think you're saying to me, unless we all just double our work or triple our work, etc., we cannot do all the work we used to do and also do effective workforce planning at a vastly accelerated pace. So therefore, I guess we've got two problems which you are describing. One problem is, how do we automate and simplify the tasks which HR traditionally does, and how do we do that rapidly? And then the second element is, what tools do we need to create that connected data to allow us to do the workforce planning part effectively? Because, you know, some of my people I've been talking to have been struggling to get basic data about large numbers of team members across the world to answer, relatively simple questions. Who's got a driving license is the kind of question which people hadn't focused on. So I think that's very interesting. So there's two dimensions. One is the simplification of standard work, and then freeing up time to do better workforce planning.
So Tom, if I go back to your first point, going back to the AI at Work survey, we found that 52% of the respondents were working at least 5 more hours a week, and 35 10. Now, I know that we asked multiple countries, and I don't think anybody had short working hours before. So we know that kind of ongoing as human beings at this rate, we're going to go back. And we know that because we're seeing a massive impact in well-being as well, and mental health. So it's not sustainable. And I think this is the difference, isn't it? When we had a piece of workforce management, you could do it for a finite period of time, but it's not sustainable to keep doing that on a long-term basis without having some impact on your health. And so I think, what we need to do is to find a way of doing the activity, but saying, where else apart from us can we do the heavy lifting? And I think what we're saying is that when you have a kind of HCM system with the capability to do AI and machine learning, and you are right, it does depend on data in, but it can look at forecast and previous trends for you, is getting that blend right, especially in workforce management, that you can get the system to do the heavy lifting for you then as the individual, as the HR business partner, to then look at, so what does this mean? How does this fit in with other operational plans? How does this fit in with my purpose? How does this fit in with my, my budget or my balance, or what I know might be coming up, which might not be programmed in? The second thing that we're saying is empowering the organization. I know as an HR business partner, 40% when we did Day of the Life when we looked to bring in our own CRM system was taken up at workforce management. This was looking at management of total labour cost and total labour resource, very much sitting with finance and saying, are we on budget? What do we need to do to hit the end goal budget at the end of the year? Sitting down with business operational leaders to say, stop recruitment or find this person of talent, etc. But what we're saying is the capability we now have within HCM system enables HR to provide a tiering of data. So providing an operational manager with his total labour budget for him to have the autonomy to work within. I mean, we all know as HR business partners, we know the numbers, but actually the decision about how you can shape and mould that job based on what the business needs is often the empowerment of the operational leader that's going to recruit. And I think the more that we can do to enable the organisation to pick up some of these decision making, so we remove process, we remove admin and empower, not only brings a win-win for us as HR because we free up time to do more of the strategic thinking, but we also empower the organisation to be reactive based on that they can make decisions within a policy framework on recruiting. So I think that type of simple capability of, empowering managers with a dashboard on a mobile phone is something that we could be doing now to free up both managers from admin of process sign off for recruitment or pay increases or whatever, with the appropriate framework and kind of exception management, whilst keeping HR in a more reactive, wider spanning horizon on scenario-based planning.
Interesting, and I'm going to pick up on that in just a second, Kerry. Meanwhile, for the audience, please put your questions in. There's a questions and answer box and a chat box as usual on the Zoom. And I can see some questions are coming already, which I'll come to in a second. But Kerry, we've been told this for years. HR people have been told, stop doing the basic stuff. Every time you do something twice, you should be pushing that off and then actually start thinking about the more complex stuff. And frankly, we ain't that good at it. So how do we change our mindset? Because actually there's a comfort, there's a comfort to doing the old tasks which we're all used to as HR business partners, etc., which actually elevating ourselves away from that and towards what are kind of seen sometimes as a bit black arty and complicated and data heavy and difficult. And, you know, that workforce planning, all that stuff, even pushing it to managers, that's hard. We love to hide in the background a little bit and stick to our comfort tasks. So how do we cross that bridge?
Well, I think, you know, I always had a fantastic, my ex-boss was a lady called Susan Kay, and she was amazing. And she often referred to HR as cobbler's children. So if you think of like Dickensian England, and there was a cobbler's child, and they were always the one running around on the streets with no shoes. And I think as HR, we often do that, and we don't put ourselves first. We don't love ourselves. We don't put our oxygen mask on, because we're always focused out into the organization, because that's where we see our value. And I think from that perspective, we really need to understand, like we would do with any part of the organization that we support, kind of what is the roles and responsibilities as HR that we need to change? What's our skill set? What would keep us relevant moving forward on a medium term, to make sure that we can keep empowering and optimizing the organization by being the best HR function that we can be? So I've also, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, when we did the big transformation in my previous firm, I was actually HR for HR. So these were questions that we often had. And I think, you know, making sure from a psychological perspective that HR people, as they go through this workforce management change, as we empower the organization to go back to that win-win, still feel relevant, is really important in terms of mindset. And I think, you know, when we look at good change management, when we understand that people need to go through their change curve, and I think as HR, we sometimes forget that. I remember sitting with our chief HR officer and being told about the new structure, and then kind of asked to go and do the actions. And I was sitting there thinking, well, hang on, that means me. You know, often we forget that we don't give our own organization the ability to go through their change curve and to manage change well within HR as a function. And I think, you know, being clear about what the skills and the capabilities are moving forward, ensuring that we put the right training, the communications around HR, as we kind of shift left that capability to talk about kind of strategic workforce management in a shorter time scale. So it doesn't sit with HR, you become a kind of consultant to the business, I think is kind of setting the new vision for HR and making it a reality. And I think, you know, we often talk about strategy, you know, often we talk about strategy and we don't really say what that means. And I think people have a different perception of strategy. And some of the work that we did with WHO Otto Biesman's School of Management, we looked at, you know, why organizations, you know, buy and do digitalization but don't maximize the return. We found that a lot of companies, you know, focus on implementing the processes, implementing the system, but don't then think about the flexibility and the mindset that needs to wrap around that. Because if you are presented with data's great, but if you're only going to print it out, put it in a slide and then do nothing with it, you're not going to see the benefits that you actually invest in the business case.
Yes.
So you need to change the culture to be flexible, embrace change, be learning, so a learning culture, ensure that data is a data decision making. I mean, how many times in HR do we go to finance with business cases and we say, this training will give these benefits, but we're a little bit woolly? Well, we now know with machine to machine learning in HCM systems, we can track some key proof points and say, actually, if I do this, this could be the cost saving. Really great example of that is looking at an HR services. So we know that when we improve an FAQ based on the amount of people calling or looking at a chatbot, we can actually drive down and improve efficiencies to ensure our HR services focus on empathetic calls, which we wouldn't get from a machine. So there's these things that we can get from data, from AI, from machine learning, that means that we can focus on the truly important stuff. And I think this is the type of culture that we need to bring in place if we're going to make sure people feel relevant and to have those conversations so we move forward as a function.
It's very interesting. I mean, you know, HR has been as you pointed out very early in this conversation, the centre of this crisis, the function which has been to some extent most under pressure in many of our businesses in terms of reacting both to the people crisis, but then also its aftermath. But being the centre of things means exactly that. And therefore that ability to communicate the meaning of HR data and information to finance colleagues, to managers in the business, presenting them with choices and really driving that and being bold about our position within the business and the critical data and the critical information about people we understand, I think is kind of it's the new skill which goes with that new responsibility. I would say though, talking to directors from other areas, the level of sympathy and understanding of HR data, its quality, its lack or otherwise has increased. So whereas, you were describing a moment ago a long-term organizational change within a business in which, when it turned into data and all that stuff, everyone had 6 months to look at it and all that stuff. And then the data would still be wrong. Very little sympathy for the HR people. Whereas in the new world, people are more sympathetic. It's kind of like, yes, okay, you only know that information about, say, 60% of your staff, but that's better than not having that information at all. And we've got to act upon it next week. And 60% or 80% is better than 20%. And I think we need to take advantage of this as a profession, because HR has typically been about exactitude, about getting every single thing right every single time. I don't think that's possible in the kind of dynamic world you are talking about. And movement and responding to the accelerated needs and the greater speed and reactivity is more important than crossing every T and dotting every I, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think, Tommy, you're completely right. And the examples that I gave was where we had known data. So you know how many people call into an HR services. You can kind of log what they were calling in about, and you can then get the machine to machine learning to say, well, actually, if I improved my website, I could reduce those types of calls. But we all know with people data, it's exceptionally hard. We know that there's legislations that mean that people can volunteer information. And again, it can vary so differently in whatever country you're in, that sometimes it's not possible to collate all the data. And I think you're right, Tom. It is a kind of, it's never a cookie cutter. You will have to still use experience and forecasting to put the best essence and the best view out there. I mean, we don't work, and we certainly don't work now in a static environment where forecasting is easy. I don't think anybody is saying that right now.
No.
Therefore, it's about the responsiveness. But in order to be responsive, you kind of have to be aware of where you can pull from. So, I remember as an HRBP, you'd be often asked, because you had a risk on the risk register, to collate people's skills, and we'd load them onto a system. And we probably do that as and when needed. I think what we're seeing now is that we know that both current skill capability plus historical skill capability is something, as we go into business resilience, is something really handy. So I could have been a store manager in a retail store, 2 roles ago. Actually, that might have been really handy when, we first went into lockdown, to actually pull me back in to be frontline, because I had the skills that I could reinvent. And I know, especially for our NHS, they were often looking at where people had moved roles to where they could move them to focus on critical services. So I think what we're seeing is that, rather than it's kind of HR policing these processes to say to the business, would you mind? I think what we're seeing is the kind of capability for people to own their own profiles, to go onto the system, to load it, and it's a win-win again. To provide my capability to the business so you can see me for my own career progression or potential of projects, because we know in essence that a standard job for some organizations is changing to be more project-based work. But also, when we do need to look at business continuity and business management, that's a kind of database that people can look at to say, where can I reapply? We also know from workforce management, because we were doing some work with a large retailer, it's really fantastic to think at future progression and scenario planning. So, if I take my local small retail shop, we know that historically you had walked in, you would have probably had someone serving you, and you would have just gone there to buy a top up of groceries. We know those spaces are changing. You probably would self-scan. You potentially might go and pick up your Amazon delivery, and therefore the function of those stores are fundamentally changing. So the work that we were doing with that organization was to say, if this is the skills that I have now, and this is the skills that we want in the future, in maybe 2 years' time. So rather than being a store manager, they wanted the vision to be an experience manager. How do you do that? And I think what we can say is basically, we know the career paths that people take, and we know the skills that will be required in an experienced manager. So how then over the 2-year process can you plot those? And therefore, as you enable job descriptions to go out, you're constantly moving the organization to that 2-year point, rather than having to do a kind of stop, redesign, transform, and then go again. Because we all know as HR that when you do these big transformations, when you have to do restructure, productivity drops as people have to refocus, go through that anxiety, change curves, and then come back up again. And obviously, where you can move people to that through timing, through workforce management, has got to be a better way forward.
So what you're kind of describing to me is a kind of 3-tier system, and actually the questions coming in are largely about this area too, a kind of 3-tier system, one which we are familiar with from the past, but perhaps have not enacted. One is looking at the medium to long-term future of the business and the kind of data and information and likely overall direction of the organization, and that's that workforce strategy side of things. Then your second part, which is kind of workforce planning, which is using real data about the current people, working out where their journeys need to go to fulfill that in the medium term. And then of course we've got that very reactive direct scheduling of staff and actually making sure people are in the right place in the short term as well, but at a whole different level of skill and a whole different level of insight than many of us have deployed in the past.
I think you're right. And I think I see kind of the core area of this is in workforce management, this kind of consultancy of the HR business partner is really going to be translating that vision of what the future of work will look like for the areas of the business that they support. And that's going to be working with operational managers, it's going to be working with thought leaders like yourself, that's going to be working even with the CTIO, because digitalization is happening to many roles. And so being able to articulate what that means and what the kind of human element parts are and what the systems element parts are is going to be really important. Also, again, location still plays a role. We talked about earlier, normally if you had some crisis management, you would have moved skills. Finding skills and capabilities of where that might sit, is that agile, is that in the building, is that a shared space, is it in the UK or elsewhere, is also going to be part of that vision. Then also understanding where are you going to be resourcing them from. And we have a kind of view that instead of your 4-box standard resourcing model, there's actually a 5th box, really pulling in what data is going to do digitalization and AI in terms of roles, considering how you're going to get people to join the organization in lower tier roles when some of those capabilities might have been moved to, a system or a process. So how are you going to get people through and up? How are you going to recruit your talent? How are you going to optimize your alumni? And how are you going to keep your brand presence as you go through? I think it's really important when we think about the employee experience. I remember Gartner last year at their conference said that 59% of external candidates felt completely happy going in as an external candidate on the recruitment process. But 40% of internal candidates said their internal recruiting process was not where it needed to be.
Yes.
And I think often we get very excited in HR about bringing in talent, and sometimes, we sometimes overlook about nurturing our own internal capabilities and our succession planning and making that a seamless transgression. And we know where we have people already in the business, time to competency in a new role is often shorter and more productive. So big watch out there that we don't get too involved in the LinkedIn, the digitalization over there, and not consider, some of our internal candidates. The next, sorry, Tom. I was going to say the next thing I think in terms of the consultancy of HR business partnering is around workforce capability and agility. And what we need from this, and we touched about it earlier, is the flexibility of the workforce, whether that's in skills and capabilities, whether we move from jobs to projects, whether we look at our contracts or our benefits, where we work. Do we work remotely? Do we work in an office? Do we work anywhere in the world? All of these things need to be considered, and they've been very much kind of fast forwarded through the current pandemic. And then the other thing we talked about, and there's no good time to sort your data out, but you just have to stick this, stake in the ground and go for it, is to really think about a blue sky. What does success look like and how do I measure it? And it might not be our standard KPIs that we would have had, like total labour cost and total labour resource. We might want to balance those with more behavioural ones, or we might need to be a bit more radical in terms of looking at other metrics moving forward. And I think this is going to be the kind of new kind of consultancy role where we have kind of AI and machine learning, because of the time to respond to market is shortened. The agility and the resistance means that as HR business partners, communication and transparency will be king, as we obviously look to the systems to ensure that they're doing the heavy lifting on the data.
Kerry, I think that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, what through our conversation, I know we could talk all day about these topics. But time is nearly coming to an end. So I just want to kind of summarize on my thoughts about what you've been saying, which what's most notable to me is that you're not describing things which were not somewhere in the HR agenda for the last few years. We have been thinking about these things, etc. But you are describing a complete change in the business climate where we need to actually enact these things and deliver these things at a level of urgency to the health and success of our businesses, which we haven't seen before. So then I was thinking, does this amount to a whole step change in the way HR needs to perform across many of our businesses? And then I was thinking, well, it's happened to everybody else. Doctors have to behave completely differently from the way they used to. Retailers have to behave completely differently from the way they used to. Everyone else is completely changing their jobs. So why wouldn't it apply also to HR? So I think that it's a very exciting thought that actually we need to grasp all of those things which have been on the back burner and actually enact them now, or our businesses are not going to be successful.
And I think, Tom, on that, we owe it to ourselves. We've been supporting as an HR function the organisation doing that. We have, but we owe it to ourselves. We need to give ourselves some love to make sure that we're set up for success, to ensure that we can keep powering people through, because otherwise we're going to burn out, or we're not going to be delivering the requirements the organisation needs. And I think, to me, I think that's kind of, we know what we need to do, we just never really apply it often as a function to ourselves. And I think you're right, we do need to do that.
Well, I think this is fascinating, and I think that the issue which we're facing post-COVID is that for those organisations who don't achieve this, they are not going to be as successful as they would otherwise, and that lack or increase in success is going to be a very short turnaround. We don't get the luxury of multiple years of trying something and then improving it anymore, I suspect. I think this new speed is something which we need to live with and understand. So, Kerry, thank you very much for joining us today. That was really exciting and interesting.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm really looking forward to seeing your white paper, and we will be issuing the the details of that to all attendees, etc. It's going to be published, I think, next month, Kerry?
Yeah, next month. So yes, just
Great.
on final versions and reviews.
Super, and I really look forward to reading that. I think this agenda is really fascinating. I think that, you know, what I'm taking away is I need to revitalize my thoughts and my reading about the future of HR so I can understand and navigate the direction we need to take. And I need to do it quite urgently by the sound of it. So thank you again, Kerry. Our next event is next week, and it's going to be with Claire Harding, who's the HR Director of EUSA Pharma. So it's a pharmaceutical HRD we're talking to next week, which I think is going to be really interesting, talking about future-proofing the business, and not just for the next 12 months, but for the next 12 years. So I'm really interested in what pharma have to say on this dimension, actually, because the world's changed for those guys, like it has for many of the rest of us, possibly in another direction in terms of busyness, etc. But that'll be really exciting. I can't wait for that. And then I'd like to thank all our audience for attending again. It was great to see you all, and I hope that today was as interesting for you guys as it was for me. So thank you very much, and have a great day.